So this time around, AMD says that things are different. The 6700 XT will be available to purchase, the $479 price tag is real, and it delivers exceptional gaming performance at 1440p. And while I can't comment on those first 2 points, we can at least take a look at how this performs versus the 3060 Ti and 3070 to see whether this is worth kind of considering in the first place. So is the 6700 XT actually worth considering and spending mental energy over? Let's take a look. So on the surface, really great looking card. This is the first dual fan Radeon 6000 cooler design that we've seen, which isn't too different from the 6800 and 6800 XT. Just instead of that middle fan now, we get a nice big Team Rocket logo. Also pretty much the same size as the reference RX 6800, 2 slots thick, 267 mils long, but the 6700 XT is 10 millimeters shorter in terms of height. In terms of specs though, just how cut down is it versus the 6800 and 6800 XT? And the answer is by quite a big chunk. The 6700 XT has just 2/3 of the compute units of the 6800, although claims to operate at a much faster boost clock out of the box, now over 2500 MHz. The video memory has also been dropped from 16GB to 12GB, but the cut that's really going to hurt performance is the smaller memory interface, now just 192-bit. That results in a much lower peak bandwidth, so honestly some pretty big reductions here overall. The real battle though is of course against the 3060 Ti and 3070, and those are the primary comparisons that we'll be making today when we take a look at the benchmarks. Now I'm not going to spend too long on the pricing and kind of discussing that throughout this review because as we've seen with most of the GPU launches today, pricing is just completely out of this world for most of the listings out there, even if you can find one in stock. So this is supposed to be a $480 GPU, only time will tell if it actually launches at that price and if it's actually available, but for now let's take a look at what kind of performance you can expect. Firstly, the cut down in compute units is real versus the RX 6800, and in Rainbow Six Siege here at 4K, it was 20% slower on average. Although for a 33% reduction in streaming processors and compute units, along with the lower memory bandwidth, you'd expect that difference to be a lot more. So far, it looks like some of that performance is clawed back thanks to the higher clock speeds. We're still talking about excellent performance though. The 6700 XT is around 30% faster here than the 5700 XT, but at least in this game, it's barely faster than a 3060 Ti. As typical with Radeon GPUs, 1440p performance is a lot more favorable than 4K, and that's exactly what we see here. Now the 6700 XT is a lot closer to 3070 performance. So although the RX 6800 was aimed to be the competitor to the RTX 3070, it looks like the RX 6700 XT fits that suit a lot better. In terms of MSRP, it's $480 versus $500, with really close performance between them. Again, that price comparison could be completely thrown out the window given today's GPU market. In Red Dead Redemption 2, the 3070 was around 2% faster at 1440p, so basically equal, but at 4K, the 3070 is about 7% faster. You'll see this scaling in pretty much every game out there, so if you are weighing up between these two cards, also consider your targeted resolution. And if you are having trouble getting your hands on a new GPU, do consider the used market as well, although that's being pretty difficult also. But if the opportunity does arise to pick up a GTX 1080 Ti on the cheap, don't be too quick to say no. As for the 6700 XT and the 3070, they're pretty close here in Death Stranding at 4K, 73 FPS versus 70, and that gap closes to make them pretty much even at 1440p. And just as we saw a 20% difference between the 6700 XT and the 6800 in Rainbow Six, we see about that same gap here in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Overall, that huge cut down in silicon doesn't seem to be having a massive impact on the 6700 XT, at least not on paper. Definitely not a 35% plus difference that you'd expect. Then versus the 3070, we're looking at about even performance at 1440p, with the 3070 taking a slight lead at 4K. So just as the MSRP of the 6700 XT slots right between the RTX 3060 Ti and 3070, that's pretty much where the gaming performance falls as well most of the time, although a bit closer to the 3070. There are a few AMD optimized optimized games out there where it'll even beat the RTX 3070 by a nice chunk, especially if we're talking about 1440p, but for the most part, the 3070 is the faster GPU. But that's not even factoring in how far ahead Nvidia is in other aspects such as ray tracing, DLSS, and their NVENC encoder for streaming. Those are features that many would happily pay a bit extra for even if regular gaming performance was about even, so I'm not going to pretend that it's a one-to-one comparison. Across 10 games at 1440p, the 3070 is clearly the faster card in a few of these titles, then they're about even in a few more, and in a couple AMD optimized games, the 6700 XT takes the lead. Here's how that looks in terms of the percentage gained by the 3070. In most cases, you're looking at about a 5% or so lead, and again, that would increase quite a bit at 4K, where the 3070 typically does a bit better. As for production workloads, this is another area where AMD is lagging behind Nvidia quite a bit. Stuck with OpenCL compute, the 6700 XT is slower than a 3060 in Blender when rendering a 4K image, and when we factor in Nvidia's optics, render times are over twice as long as a 3070. When it comes to video editing, the huge cut down in compute units again means performance here isn't that great, just a little bit faster than a 3060 when stabilizing a 6K video clip. As for thermals, the dual fan cooler seems perfectly adequate for the 230 watt board power, with the average GPU temp settling in at 76 degrees C. The hotspot for the memory and GPU are also well within check. This was with the fan speed set to auto, which landed at around 1650 RPM. Here's an idea of what that sounds like. So in the end, the Radeon 6700 XT is really a great GPU. Really good performance here for the $480, but I just can't comment on pricing and availability, which is kind of the main point here. It's kind of the big factor which kind of makes this worth it or not, right? I have no idea if AMD have produced enough of these to the point where you can actually buy one, and I have no idea what's going to happen with AMD's board partners, and if we're going to have, a repeat of the 6800 and 6800 XT launch, where the board partners just decide to charge, $300 over MSRP. Pretty much all AMD needs to do at this point is produce enough and actually sell it at MSRP, and they win, because buying a 3060 Ti at $400 or a 3070 at MSRP $500 US, it's pretty much impossible. Actually, it is impossible in some regions. But on paper at least, I do think the 3060 Ti and 3070 are the better cards. So if they do kind of end up being priced similar to the 6700 XT, those are probably the ones that I would go for, especially due to everything else that they can do, like DLSS, ray tracing, and streaming on the NVENC encoder. They are also the better option for content creation tasks and production workloads if you do those. So that's about all I can add at this point. I think the rest is up to AMD to actually produce this thing and lock down that price. If you're interested, I will have this linked down below. As always, a huge thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.